This is our Industry Perspectives panel. The theme for this year is sustainability in the new IT ecosystem, critical success factors for today and key preparations for tomorrow. And the idea behind this panel is pretty simple. Every year through research, we really do identify the one key issue and challenge that the agencies and the government as a whole are facing. And this year, that theme definitely is how to manage and be successful in a new ecosystem, which is now, over the past few years, evolved into an environment where agencies have less direct ownership of their infrastructure and applications and devices, and into a really services and cloud and mobile-driven environment. And our thought here is to identify and invite some of the industry thought leaders who have different perspectives from different areas based on their backgrounds, who can talk as a group about this issue. So today we have, to my far right, David Lingenfelter, who is the FiberLink Security Officer. Who's the Chief Security Officer for Moz 360. Adam Bosnian, the Executive Vice President of Americans for CyberArk. Dan Skinner, who's the Director for Channel Systems Engineering at Forescout. And to my far left, Steve Antone, the VP of Federal Solutions at Lumention. So to start off with, we're just going to start off by having everyone quickly introduce themselves. Just take about a minute and a half, say what your organization does, a bit about your background, and if you could also answer your first question, which is what you see as the biggest challenge executives face today, given the changing nature of the federal IT landscape. And David, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks, Param. David Lingenfelter, I am the Information Security Officer for Moz 360 by FiberLink. We are a cloud-based mobile device management company. We've been around for about 20 years, long before cloud, but we've been had a hosted service when it was called hosted. Now we have a cloud service, so kind of changed with the times. But my background, I've been doing security for a little over 20 years in the industry. I am very heavily involved with the Cloud Security Alliance, as well as working with a couple of the NIST groups on mobile initiatives and cloud initiatives. Oh, and the challenge that the federal IT managers are facing today, I've had a lot of conversations about just the sheer volume of data. So mix that with cloud and mobile. I think one of the biggest challenges that people are having is just how are people accessing the data and how are they monitoring and ensuring that the data is staying secure.
Thank you. Adam?
Great. My name is Adam Boz. I'm with CyberArk Software. CyberArk Software is all about helping organizations address the privilege challenge. Privilege challenge is anything to do with people who have privileges within your organization, whether they be contractors, managed service folks, your own employees, or happening in the cloud. And privilege challenge is really dealing with anyone who has the power to do anything more than normal access to target systems, whether it's leveraging admin accounts on a system or leveraging privileges on a Unix system. They're doing more than the normal user. How do you control that? How do you control the access? How do you monitor it? How do you make sure it's approved, et cetera? Been doing it for 8 years, 1,400 companies using it around the world, lots of federal agencies, and glad to be here with you, Parm, and GTRA to raise the awareness, continue to raise the awareness around privileged accounts. I think one of the things that we find the largest challenges that folks have in the federal IT landscape, and frankly it's in any IT landscape, it's prioritization. I think these events are really wonderful for continuing to increase the education of where the challenges are and what can be done. But I think that what we hear back both at events like this and dealing with our prospects and customers is, how do I prioritize? How do I decide what I work on first, what I work on second, third, et cetera? And many times it's not necessarily just a matter of how many dollars are available, but it's about the personnel that are available to do the work, the expertise that those personnel have, et cetera. So I would leave it at prioritization, and then we'll circle back on how we can help with that prioritization.
Fantastic. Dan?
So I'm Dan Skinner. I'm an engineer at Forescout. I enjoy architecting new solutions and bringing new technologies to government.
Can you turn the mic towards you?
And here at Forescout, we offer products that do security automation and network access control. We give visibility into everything on the network in a different way than your typical scanners. We connect to the switch infrastructure, so we see truly everything on the network. And then give you access control to move that entity to the right place on the network.
And Steve?
So Steve Antone with Lumention Security. Lumention is an endpoint management and security company, so we do all things on the endpoint, everything from your standard antivirus all the way up through application whitelisting and encryption and patch management and so forth. I've been in the business for about 18 years, 10 of which has been focused on IT security and the federal government, all with the same company, with Lumention. So I feel like a dinosaur in the vendor community. That's quite a long time to be with one software vendor. I looked at this question and was thinking about this question, some of the conversations that have revolved around morale. And I think that's, when I'm out talking to prospects and customers, people are really being affected by the debt ceiling and the sequestration and all the different things that are coming together that are really making it tough to do their jobs. And I think one of the biggest challenges is keeping people motivated, and right now morale is down. So I think one of the challenges that I'm seeing, because if you don't have a well-motivated workforce, you have a significant problem. That's half the battle, is getting people motivated, and then you can accomplish things that look like they might be, not being able to be accomplished. So morale is an issue that I'm seeing quite frequently.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. So we're going to get right into this. We have a lot of things to discuss. Adam, I'm going to start with you. We see infrastructure increasingly spread today. As I mentioned earlier, you have on-premise, you have managed, you have the cloud or as a service model. So what insights can you give to IT leaders in terms of how can they better understand the breadth of their security challenges they face in this mixed environment, and then what they need to do about it?
I think it's a question that everyone faces, right? I think people, understand more today that they're responsible for their infrastructure, wherever that infrastructure is. I think it used to be these four walls, and then we had some contractors coming in. There was a great panel earlier about the cloud, and people were very focused on the cloud. But I feel a little bit, unless we get into the higher levels like the folks that are here, very often there's a view of compartmentalization. My job is the cloud, my job is to manage the managed services folks, my job is to manage the internal infrastructure. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a greater education across the team that your infrastructure is everywhere, and know that it's everywhere, and that it's all of our responsibilities, all of your responsibilities to address it. Number two, I think that, frankly, I think IT leaders do understand the breadth of security. They do understand security challenges. I think there's an assumption that it's different depending on where it is. And frankly, what we see out there and what we have coming back from our prospects is the challenges that I have within my environment are actually the same challenges that Salesforce.com has in their environment. If I'm looking to address how people gain access to a system or monitoring what they do, I should be asking Salesforce how they do that. It's the same problem. It just may be one step removed, but if it's important for you to know that you have control for your own stakeholders and for your mission, same thing with your partners that are out there. So really, knowing that those security challenges are actually the same, just in a different place, and then mandating back to those folks, right? I think that's really the biggest key on all of it. I think there were some great things that I heard last night and this morning regarding some of the success that some of you folks have had and actually holding the line with the cloud provider or managed service provider in terms of saying, you need to allow me the visibility to look at what's happening with my stuff, even though it's in your environment. I think that that's a tough conversation. It's a tough battle because the cloud vendor or the managed service provider will say, these are my people or these are my assets. I'll give you reports. But to be able to do it independently is the key part of it all. So I think the trust but verify model is very important. And finding a way to compel the vendor to accede to that is very important. It's done through relationship, it's done through negotiation, it's done through SLA, it's done through I'll go to another vendor. So that's what we've seen be successful. It's moving in that direction, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be done on it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned obviously cloud is kind of the biggie, and David, I'm going to ask you kind of the granddaddy question. How can an IT executive or an agency move to the cloud while feeling safe and secure that the data is being kept safe?
Sure. So to kind of play off of Adam's answer going around the security challenges, and it's not different just because the data's in a different place. So that's the first part of it, is to understand that wherever the data resides, you have some very basic security principles that need to be in place, whether it be access control or data encryption or data security, data replication. All those things remain in place, whether it's cloud, on-prem. Another thing with cloud, as it's matured over the last several years, is it's not an all or nothing game. So when it first came out, everybody was all cloud. Oh, we're not going to have data centers anymore. They're going to go the way of the dodo. That's not the case. You can still keep mission critical or highly sensitive data in your data center and still have cloud services that crunch the information, that do all the heavy work. And that's the benefit of cloud. And that's where we can really see a lot of benefit and growth through cloud is through the CPU power and through the processing power that the cloud can offer while still protecting your data, keeping it in-house, having that kind of hybrid approach.
Any other comments on that?
Yeah, I actually would comment. I think last year we had, was it SAIC, I think, came in and talked about cloud, and our solutions have nothing to do really with the cloud, but it was interesting because he pointed out, he did exactly what you were talking about. They really analyzed it, and they just didn't go to the cloud and thought they were going to save a bunch of money. They actually went and analyzed it and kept some of it, like that hybrid model. And I thought that was a very interesting thing because, you go cloud first and you jump in that direction. I know some agencies that have jumped in that direction and have gotten kind of, their costs have increased slightly. So I think it's very important that when you go to the cloud, think about those things and analyze it first. It's certainly a beneficial architecture, but you don't have to put everything there. You can keep some of that critical, assets and data back at the home.
Absolutely. And I think the first step is really understanding what you have, what data you have, and what applications you have before you can even make that decision. So Steve, next question is actually for you. The next few questions are really focusing on security. Efficiency is another big issue right now, a big challenge, as you actually mentioned in your response to the earlier question. So how can an agency improve its security posture while also increasing its efficiency in terms of its investments?
Yeah. So interesting question. I think that what I see and what spurred this on was the number that I think it was Keith threw out this morning's session, where 64% of projects and applications aren't being used in environments that are deployed. And I guess one way to gain some immediate efficiency that I think can be done, it's easier said than done, but is stop spending money and resources and time on underperforming projects and products. We see it all the time when we go out and talk to people, and they've got a product that's on the shelf that they plan on deploying, or they've deployed a product that is not meeting the requirements and they're not fully utilizing. And I think in those areas you can gain some efficiency fairly quickly to just stop spending resource and time on those projects that are not meeting the requirements. And I think that also from a technology perspective, we can't continue to rely on the traditional security defenses out there. Antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spam, the filtering technologies are just really not cutting it anymore. And just in a recent study, we saw that 99% of organizations have all these traditional security. I mean, everybody in this room probably got AV on their endpoints. However, 67% of those organizations are still experiencing unacceptable levels of malware infiltration. And really what that relates to from an efficiency perspective is your IT department is busy reacting to these events and these malware incidents and so forth. So I think investing in technologies and taking the risk really to go out and look at some of the advanced technologies that are out there that are looking at the problem from a different perspective instead of from a filtering perspective is required to gain the efficiency and the security posture to keep everybody safe.
And Dan, what about you? What are your thoughts? Do you think that agencies should look to get higher levels of security from existing equipments, or do they need to look outside, or what's your approach on that?
I think it's absolutely to maximize with what you have. Oftentimes we're seeing budgets consolidate, and departments may have chosen different antivirus. So consolidate, pick the one that works best for you, and focus on that one. And don't necessarily upgrade hardware to get a new technique. Look at the problem you're trying to solve and see if you can solve it with the technique, not necessarily an upgrade.
Absolutely. So, Adam, excuse me, we see a lot of money being spent a lot on being reactionary, and I think that's also a very expensive way to run an organization. Can you talk a bit about how to take your money away from reactionary spending versus towards more proactive and defensive expenditures?
You know, I first of all, you know, reactionary happens, right? I don't think we're ever going to, you know, obviate reactionary moves, right? I think that, you know, certainly early on in the advent of whether it's new regulations or new threats, we don't know. We're still learning. The whole community is still learning. So when you learn something new, you react to try to address it, and you move forward from there. I think where we are today, though, is there's a lot more knowledge of what the threat vectors are. There's a lot more knowledge of how those threats are undertaken. And yet I'm still surprised sometimes at the prioritization and how things are prioritized. We've heard ad nauseum, look at your highest value assets first, get those buttoned up first, and then move out from there. And yet to the point that was just made, I think by Steve, that there's still so much money still pouring into the perimeter. That's an issue, right? The amount of money that continues to be poured into the perimeter, because that's what we've been spending on, and the conversation always seems to devolve down to, well, how did the bad guy get in? There was a comment made by Tom Riley of ArcSight, now HP, several years ago, where he posited that he felt that our security strategy thinking was starting at the wrong point. We're trying to figure out how to make sure the bad guy doesn't get in, and therefore our security strategy is perimeter wall, bigger wall, thicker wall, etc. And yet they keep getting in. His point was, if we assume that they're already inside, not that they are, but if we assume that they're already inside, our security strategy would look differently. We'd start to put a hard shell around the high-risk assets and not keep pouring the money back at the wall level of it. So I think that that's part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation is time to impact. There are solutions, or excuse me, there are challenges that you can start to address within your environment. CyberArk focuses on one of them, the privilege challenge, that doesn't take a lot of money or a lot of time to fix, but the time to impact and the amount of impact that you have in addressing that essentially stops the big spend that has to happen when something bad does occur, whether it's an attack or it's some kind of an audit reaction. So it's the old oil commercial, you can pay now, you can pay later. I think if you look at what's the biggest impact that I can have in the shortest amount of time, and the shortest amount of effort, that's going to put the right types of challenges in the right part of the graph of what should I do first, second, third, fourth.
Sure. Steve, you mentioned, and Adam actually kind of referenced this as well, you talked about some technologies that are failing and not working, and you gave a great statistic earlier. So what are your thoughts? Do agencies continue to use those and invest in those, or do you walk away from them, or what's the answer there?
So, you know, I wouldn't suggest that anybody walks away from all of their traditional security tools they have. I mean, there's obviously a layered, defense in-depth strategy that I think everybody has to have, and there's some use for these traditional tools like antivirus and firewalls and the perimeter stuff. I think that's okay. That's very commoditized at this point, and so really, in looking at the problem, I think we have to look at it differently. And right now, everybody, and even in our collaboration sessions, many of the people were talking about all of these filtering technologies or signature-based technologies, and that's just an arms race that nobody is going to win, because you can't anticipate the threat. And until we stop and trying to anticipate what the next threat looks like, we're going to be in this same circle of inefficiency and reactive mode. And so, there's kind of a thing that we use, Lou mentioned, it's really, looking at it from a threat-centric perspective, meaning, is this thing bad? Or looking at it from a trust-centric perspective, meaning, is this good? Where did it come from? Who wants to use it? Why do they want to use it? All of those things. There's technology out there that will allow you to apply policy to the endpoints that will definitively block those types of malware that's coming down and that's getting through all the filtering technologies. So again, I think that the reactive technology is not going away, and I think it has some use, but I think we need to move into more of some of the advanced capabilities that we see out there with some of the people that are in this room and the vendors that are providing it, which is going to require some of the CIOs and the CISOs to take some risk. And nobody gets fired for buying IBM, right? That has to go away. I think you need to really look at some of these companies and technologies that have some of this advanced capability that will significantly improve the productivity and the security posture.
Sure. Anyone agree, disagree?
So, the last couple questions, I've heard a lot about efficiencies and utilizing what you have more efficiently. One of the things that I'm seeing and hearing a lot about is just, again, the volume of data that's happening. So, yeah, I agree, and I don't think there's anybody in this room that would disagree that the government could work a little more efficiently and utilize what it has more efficiently. But you're going to get to that wall. And I think Steve kind of hit it on that at the end, is not only do you have to look at what you currently have, but you need to look at what's new out there, whether it be a new technology to replace your AV, maybe it's not signature-based anymore, maybe it's more heuristic, or maybe it's not buying more hardware to expand what you have, maybe it's going out to the cloud, maybe it's a different type of technology. People have to start looking at the new technologies that are out there and embracing them more quickly.
Absolutely. And actually, we've had a lot of talk about this, the efficiency and money and budgets. I think it's maybe a good time to pause and see if the audience has any questions or comments, or if you agree with the folks. Yes, Sunny.
Great conversation. Just one thing, first of all, I think the statistic used earlier by the gentleman from VA, yeah, there's some question around that. Not quite sure that's the right number. I've been a federal CIO before, and I can tell you 67% is way too high, and I don't think that's correct. But anyway, there is definitely some duplication, but 67% of 90 billion, that's quite an assertion there. I think the challenge that I see, and I think you gentlemen have talked about it, is that we're not talking about the stuff that we need to protect. So what is it? What exactly are we trying to protect? And it's about the data. It's about stuff that most government agencies don't really, or don't have a good regimen or classification, or what's really sensitive data versus open data. And so we are spending more time doing all the defense in depth and perimeter and other kinds of defenses which are now arcane and archaic. And we haven't spent enough time setting up what do we need to protect, and who needs access to that and when. Because this keeps changing. This data becomes information and keeps going around. And so could you comment on what is that efficiency to try to get that information anywhere, anytime, securely and reliably? You know, that's what we want to do. But we don't spend enough time looking at the data and making that available, as opposed to just setting up all these other defenses. So I just thought I'd ask your opinion on that.
You know, I think it's an interesting comment, and one of the messages that we've heard up here and all day is that there's a lot of data out there and big data. And one of the interesting points that I feel on that is the vibe that I get is that there's a lot of data, and that's a good thing, and we just need to figure out how to crunch it. And I can get a lot of data about what my kids are doing every day at school, but really what I care about is what they're doing mostly in terms of how they're treating other people, number one, and number two, how they're doing from grades. I could care less about the other stuff. The other stuff is noise, right? You need to somehow bring that signal to noise ratio in the right direction. And I think that that's one of the challenges, right? Because we have all this data, we're trying to look at all this data rather than prioritize what data should I be looking at. You know, we play in the identity management space, and everyone says, listen, I need to solve the problem for my 4,000 employees about how to do identity management, how to provision, because I want to make sure that the secretary doesn't have access to their boss's laptop. Well, that's a one-to-one scenario. The secretary has access to one laptop. When you start to look at the amount of people behind the scenes that could have access to the infrastructure and the data that's there, and the power that's there, that's the data that I want to look at. That's the activity that I want to look at. So I think we need to start to put different lenses onto the data that's out there and start to look at the data that's around, not the metrics that are not just around access to all the systems or things that I put in the yellow and the green part of the data, but what are my highest value assets? Who's accessing them? What are they doing around those assets? Does that make sense? That's a starting point to be able to bring it into a little bit more of a handleable approach. Once we get really good at that, then we can start to apply those metrics and those approaches to the larger set of data.
Just a quick comment. So agreed that 64% does seem kind of high. What I can tell you is at our company, roughly 30% of the people that buy from us don't deploy the solution. And we've got a pretty good post-sale implementation insurance project or program where we out-call for no cost and try to get them to install, because obviously we want that renewal business. And if you look at, so 30% that don't deploy, but our renewal rate on an annual basis is 85 to 90%. So not only 30% aren't renewing, you've got a percentage that continue to renew, but they haven't even deployed the product yet. So I think whatever the percentage is, I think it's too high. 30% is too high, 64% is definitely too high. But just thought I'd share that fact, because that's real numbers from our company. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, frustrations? We all have them. All right. We're going to move on to mobility. David's from Moz obviously has a lot of insights on that. So BYOD is unavoidable. It's happened. Everyone knows it. Can you share some insights and your thoughts on how an agency can ensure that either legacy systems or new IT application systems can actually work with devices that they have absolutely no control over?
Sure. So, yeah, the BYOD era is upon us. Whether companies have adopted it or don't adopt it or deny it, it's here. And it's not just the physical device of saying, my employees can bring their own device. It's the notion of what this device is. Laptops running Windows operating system, IT administrators can remove local administrative access. They can take control of that device and turn it into an IT function. You can't do that with these. These devices are designed for consumers. They're designed to be used by anybody and everybody. And IT cannot take that back. So that's the BYOD concept that's taken over. Whether or not, again, you allow your employees to bring their own, or you purchase them off the shelf and you hand them out to your employees, they're still your employees' devices. The second you hand it over to them, they log into it, they have complete control of it, and you can't stop that. You cannot take that away unless you completely remove the operating system and replace it with something else, which I don't know too many people that are doing that outside of the deep DoD side. But the point there is you have to think differently. Again, it's not about limiting access to this device. It's not about making sure you know where this device is all the time or what people are doing on this device. It's about what data is on this device and what data is being accessed by this device. So these tie very nicely into legacy systems, whether it's inside your perimeter or something that you've already migrated out to the cloud. The point is you have to make sure that you're monitoring and managing these devices differently than you've done laptops in the past. Anything that's going to touch corporate resources or company data, you need to make sure you isolate on these devices. And you need to make sure that the end user who owns and controls all aspects of this device can't put something on here that can then impact that. So you have to separate them. You have to put kind of a container in place to make sure that the corporate resources, the enterprise resources are controlled and kept in a locked environment where whatever else they put on there, whether it be Angry Birds or whether or not they're downloading something off of one of the Chinese app stores because it's free and it didn't cost them 99 cents. You got to make sure that the data is what's protected. The device, we've lost. These are no longer controlled by corporate at all. I don't care if you buy them and you hand them out to your employee along with a nice thick ream of paper telling them what the policies are around using it. We've lost that game. We got to protect the data.
Any thoughts on that?
And that sort of ties into a couple of things we've talked about here today. We talked about the perimeter getting a lot of money dumped into it, and it's because of the way we're making our perimeters.
There is no perimeter.
That perimeter has been extended because of BYOD. Now there is no perimeter.
Yeah.
And then how do we protect the data? I really think it comes back to need to know. You have to map the users to the data they're using. And with BYOD, and these containers that we're building for iPads or different mobile devices, it really puts a spotlight on that problem and makes people rethink how are we giving access to the data. One particular DoD agency, they have 15,000 different enclaves. Well, that's a pretty large perimeter if you string it out like a beach around a lake. But they could have one perimeter for a certain classification level and then focus on the data and then maybe 15,000 different profiles for different users of the data, I'm guessing it's going to be less. If you have a set of kernels, they're all going to need the same access to the same types of data. And it's probably going to be less than 15,000 different profiles. So if we look at mapping the users to the data the way we map them to enclaves today, I think some of these problems will solve themselves.
Interesting. Dan, I'm actually going to stay with you. You know, talking about shifting gears to inventory, we know that in the manufacturing and industrial worlds and in organizations, inventory management is huge, is an important way that, and mainly one of the main ways where they manage their costs and reduce their costs. How does that translate into the IT environment, to these organizations here today? What does inventory management and asset management play in the cost-cutting game?
So I think it's very important today. Inventory's always been important, but it now pays for itself. You know, we go into hospitals and they have all different kinds of stuff, pharmaceutical robots and baby heart monitors, and these things are connected to the network. And so with this wide range of different things connecting to the network, the question always comes up, does that get inventoried or not? And nowadays, looking at your entire inventory, whether it be a baby heart monitor or applications installed on a laptop, is paramount, because we can go into organizations and look at their renewal cost and what they're actually using. You know, and if you're renewing Adobe Acrobat at 30,000 copies, but you only have 10,000 copies installed, then you can write a smaller renewal check and repurpose those funds to other initiatives. And the way we've done inventory in the past is sort of a point in time, once a year, send somebody around with a scanner. But the systems are advanced enough that we can inventory systems as they connect to the network and get this data to be real time, so that security can use the inventory to search for insecure versions of Java, you know, old versions of Java that need to be targeted and eliminated. And finance can use it to target their renewal costs towards actual usage.
Believe it or not, we're actually at the end of the questions that I had. Are there any questions from the audience? We have about 15 minutes left here. Any questions for the panelists? Yes.
Well, I'm kind of stepping back here because this has been bothering me since it was stated. When Steve, this is specifically addressed to Steve, when you stated that 30% of the users don't implement the tool, I wanted to ask that you follow up with the people, because actually as a government agent sitting out here and hearing that 30% that purchase don't actually use the tool, it kind of bothers me. So I appreciate your honesty, but it's kind of, for me, disturbing, you know.
Yeah, sure. So I understand that, and like I said, we do quite a bit of things to try to help the customer install. In many cases, it's bought because somebody's trying to check a box for some compliance thing, and it's bought by a different organization. And then when it gets flipped over to the people that have to go implement, they go, well, wait a minute, what's this? I don't, you know, I'm not going to deploy this. And so that's kind of what happens. And it's unfortunate, because, I mean, we really try to get them to, you know, we're not going to just offer up a refund, but we're trying to get them to use the capability and use the solution. But in some cases, it's just very political, and you can't get it done. So understand, I mean, it's frustrating for me as well, because I'm also a taxpayer, and it drives me nuts when I see that happening. And it's unfortunate. And I'll bet that, you know, with some of the other vendors here, they have some of the same problems in you know, getting adoption going. Or they try to deploy it, and it just sits there, and they say, okay, now we got the agent out there, or we've installed it, but they're not using it fully. And that, a lot of times, that's a large percentage of the 30% is, I've got it installed, but I'm not using it, and I'm not getting any benefit out of it because I was told to go, you know, install it. So that's kind of a little bit more color anyway as to why that number is so high, and I certainly would like to get it down, because it affects our revenue, right? At the end of the day, they're not gonna renew at some point, and because they're not using it. So.
I agree with what you're saying, right? I don't disagree with the number necessarily. And I think a lot of times there's more of a disconnect on the teams within the end customer. And whether it's because people have left their jobs, or because one organization bought and the other didn't, or one organization felt that the problem was this big and the other organization thinks it's this big, there's more disconnect in the team, and it blows back on the vendor, right? I want 100% of our product to be installed. I don't want the vendors to be viewed sometimes as used car salesmen that's just trying to dump as much software as possible out there. We're in business to solve problems, and we enjoy when there's a good implementation and when there's good alignment between the internal teams and with the vendor. Those are some of the best success when you go home at night on those ones. And where I find those happening, it's when the leadership communicates the best to their team of what they want and how they don't want it bigger than a bread box. I want it this way. Don't go crazy on it. They try to control it based on budget, but if they communicate what they're really looking for and a little bit clearer, and then on top of that, communicates the same thing to the vendor, right? So now the vendor and the team that's going to implement are aligned, and now we're on the same page and we're moving forward lockstep. That's where we've seen the biggest successes and the least amount of inefficiency.
Could you comment on, I'm sorry, could you comment on how we can collaborate better between industry and government to look at the threat? The threat is more sophisticated. You guys are under attack as well in terms of intellectual property and other things. There's a supply chain issue, as Dr. Ross was speaking about yesterday. We're watching a rather worthy adversary, should we say, who is quite sophisticated and quite patient. And so the kind of things that we look for, the big events, the big egress of data, all of that stuff is not happening because they don't do that kind of stuff. They do more sophisticated stuff. So could you comment on how industry and government can work together in sort of a more collaborative watch program, if you would, that allows us to sort of watch out for each other, so to speak, going forward?
So one place that I've started seeing that work better, I won't say great, but better, is the banking industry. The government gets a lot of early data about foreign entities who are looking for money, who are trying to access money. They may be accessing money in foreign banks. And there's been a lot of communication lately, starting from the government coming over to the banking sector saying, hey, be on the lookout for these things. This is the types of attack. On the flip side, the banking industry has been telling the government earlier when things are happening. And part of the problem with all of that is the fear of reputation. So banks obviously don't want people to know when money has been taken. I used to work as a teller at a bank, and we would not let anybody know when we had a fraudulent check come through or anything. It was very hush-hush because you don't want to lose faith in banks. So it is very difficult, but the only way to do that is to share the information early on. I don't have the answer to how to do that. I have seen it working better in the banking industry. Like I said, I work closely with several of the major banks and working with government agencies who are feeding information to the bank, what's happening on internationally, and then the banks feeding information back to the government earlier and with more detail than in the past. But really, it just comes down to sharing information.
Yeah, I want to add on to that, and it's openness on both sides, right? I think that you made a really great point where instead of having the vendor and the customer be on opposite sides of the conversation, you made the point where we're on the same side in terms of we're both under attack, right? Our IP, whether it's customer, technology, et cetera, we're under attack, and yet too often times I feel that we're on opposite ends of the side. It would be great if there was a different GTRA event where we were sharing our war stories a little bit, and what are you hearing, or what are you going through, what are we going through type of thing. I think the openness is a big part of that, right? I think that unfortunately, and I don't know if this is a US-based concern only, but unfortunately we only hear about stuff that happens if we're, one, really in the know, or two, it's so big it hits CNN and Fox News, right? If you go, a lot of times you go to these events and people won't talk about stuff that happened within their environment because of reputational risk, personal reputational risk, organizational reputational risk. I know people who have gone and talked about some challenges that happened in their environment and talked about how they fixed them, and they were fired because they talked about it openly. And yet, how are we supposed to learn if we don't talk about it openly? I was traveling in another country 2 weeks ago and at a relatively small event, and the person who was running it had 5 little presents. Nothing major, right? 5 little presents. Nobody knew who everybody was. Nobody knew what organization they were at. And all he said was, you know, talk about some of the challenges that you've had, some incidents that have happened within your environment, and you'll have the little prize. And it was a very small, very intimate kind of environment. And you know what? 5 people talked about real incidents that happened in their environment that were impactful to their environment, and they were open and honest about it. And the conversation that flowed from that was amazing. And yet, if I was in the States, that conversation never would have happened, right? So I think we need to find a way where we're safe enough and we're protected enough where we can share some of those war stories in a little bit of a larger context and not wait for them to get so big that they're on Fox News or CNN. My personal opinion.
It's something that was recommended yesterday, is using clearances to help with that. So we need a form, but we don't necessarily want to go public with this data. You want to share the data, but it doesn't need to be on CNN. So I forget who it was, but somebody yesterday mentioned going to the CEO of each vendor and saying, who's your most trusted person? And yeah, Dr. Ron Ross, I believe. So let's clear that most trusted person and get them plugged in so they do have a safe forum to share and collaborate and take the information pertinent to that vendor back in without necessarily blabbing it all over the news.
You know, I can actually I'm sorry, go ahead.
That may be a great approach.
It is, and I can say from my perspective, being somebody who's organization tries to facilitate the dialogue, there are several people here, one of them in this room, and I'm not gonna look anywhere, but was supposed to give a talk ironically, sharing war stories for the type of organization that they are, and was told not to and the justification was, we don't want to, because what if we're the only ones who say that we had that problem? And there's a fear from leadership, and they stop those discussions from happening. And I hear it from vendors who say, well, I don't want to be the only vendor to say it. I hear it from agencies. I don't want to be the only agency. Everyone's afraid to do it. And I think it goes back to somebody mentioned leadership here. Somebody at the top needs to make a very firm, cataclysmic statement that says, this is okay to do, and I'm going to lead by saying, here's what the mistake that I made. And I think until that person does that, that culture is not going to change. And I think that whoever's sitting in the top rafters needs to kind of push that forward and make that the accepted type of discourse that the community will have. I think then you'll start seeing it trickle down, but unfortunately it will not trickle up. People want to do it. I can promise you that. It's just they're being told not to, and they're subsequently having private, secret conversations here, which is it's hilarious and sad at the same time.
You know, I think one organization that I feel did a good job in that, and I know the reason behind it was crisis PR, and they were trying to save their own skin, et cetera. And maybe they took a little long, but once they opened up, RSA did a heck of a job really talking about the attack. I mean, what Yuri Rivner did and how he stepped through all the different ways the attack went. I mean, that story has been told. It started with Yuri and his team talking about it, and that story, I've seen that story repeated 2 or 3 times at almost every event I've been to over the last 18 months. Yeah. So I think that sometimes companies need to be applauded when they do it well, instead of just us complaining about it.
Yeah.
Hello. I think it's hard to share information because a lot of times the class of attacks is different from organization to organizations. And when we start talking in terms of targeted attacks, a targeted attack may be carried out for one organization, and it may be different for another organization. So the other part is, by the time an organization find out they've really been attacked or compromised, what good is that information? I mean, you know, a lot of times when we have these targeted attacks, the ones that are more specific for specific information, they relaunch and redisguise how they go about their attacks. So often you want to share vendor information with the federal government, but vendor may, you know, the class of attack or the way the vendor is being exposed versus the way a government agency is being exposed may be completely different. So I'm not sure if there's a good way to share the data, but within a department, let's say there's a federal agency and there are different components within a federal agencies, I think there has to be ways to share information within that federal agency.
So,
because now that becomes important because when you look at the data types, some of the data types are pretty similar. So if there's ways, for instance, within, let's say, DOJ, right, you have, you know, Office of Justice Program, you have FBI, right? So there may be ways for those 2 components to communicate within a DOJ environment to share information about particular attacks. So I think it's very hard, but we have to come up with a better format and a better way to share within federal agencies.
Well, that's fair, and you can flip it around too. Instead of clearing somebody at each vendor so that they can go into government and share data, you could designate somebody in government for each vendor to go into those vendors and give the information. a lot of time I do knowledge transfer sessions, and I spend a lot of time doing the same session over and over and over again with the same type of people in government at different times. If we get them all together or designate leads, it would funnel that information a lot better.
Yeah, so one of the things on the attacks is the targets are always different. But if you look at attacks against different industries, whether it's government, whether it's civilian, whether it's private, whether it's public, the attacks themselves, the methods they use are very similar. You look at the VA, who unfortunately was hit a couple years ago, it went through a single laptop. You look at RSA, it went through a single laptop. The attacks are the same. The most important thing, we've said it several times up here, the most important thing anybody has is their data. We're not asking to share that. Don't share what was taken. Don't share what was broken. Don't share what was breached. Tell us how. Tell us how they breached your perimeter. Was it a single user? Was it an old technology? Was it an unpatched system? I don't care, personally, or as a citizen of the United States, what data is taken. As a security professional, I care how. And that's where we need to focus. I do agree that vetting somebody on the civilian side and then assigning somebody from the government side to work together is the right approach. You don't need to vet a person on the civilian side to have top secret clearance. They don't need that because they don't need to know the data. I already know the systems everybody in the government uses. I know your layers of defense. I don't know your data. I don't want to know. I just want to know when something happens, how did it get through? Was it because of an unpatched system? Was it because of a legacy system? Was it because of human error? And that's where we need to talk more. And that I don't think requires a very high or deep level of knowledge of what data is there.
Well, I think also you brought up a very interesting point, but also we have to take in consideration indicators of compromise, right? And there are various types of indicators of compromise. So while the methods may be the same, the way in which they execute these methods may be totally different. So, while, they may exploit a 0-day off of this patch 2, right? That same attack vector may be used, but the other indicators that associate with this attack may be different. So we just have to watch how we do that. And one of the things I would love to see is if there was better ways to share metadata about these particular attacks. Take the indicator of compromise, some information that we collect from packet information, and create metadata, and that metadata could be shared. And that way, no one is really being exposed about a particular incident. So people have some privacy in terms of not being exposed about a particular attack if we're able to
and any good nation state or any good sponsored attack is never going to do it the same way twice.
Right.
They will use the same vulnerabilities. They'll try it a different way. They'll leave a USB drive in the parking lot, and then maybe they'll email you an attachment that looks like it came from your kid. They're going to do it different ways, but they're still attacking the same vulnerabilities.
It seems that this is a lot more pervasive. We've talked about partnerships, kind of going back to lessons learned and reaping that, but this goes far beyond just trusted people, better partnering between, the private sector community and the government. We withhold so much information about methods, modes, and means from the employees in federal agencies that they've got to be cleared. I work in environment, they've got to be cleared at a TS level to have the discussion, and yet they're the ones that are doing the work. And I think some of your discussions have started in the right direction about partnering, knowledge awareness, and disclosure, but it's going to take the whole community to get there. The earlier panel on education, that's a huge piece. My staff wants to know what's going on. They want to know how they fit in all this. And so I think this is a real productive discussion, and hopefully can drill it home.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I equate employees to children sometimes, and I get reprimanded for that, but it's a lot similar. It's very similar. You often are outnumbered by your children, as I am. You're outnumbered by your employees, but at the same time, employees are a lot like kids, and they just want to learn. They just want to be told. They want to be spoken to honestly and truthfully, and I agree with you 100%. That needs to start, and it needs to go deeper.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm getting the sign. Yes.
So, this is kind of a
in terms of how you work with governments. What I see is a gap between what you're trying to sell us and how we're architected in terms of our networks and our firewalls and everything else. And I know we have a real struggle when a vendor comes in and tries to sell us a product without having a service, if you will, that really can come in and help us look at how we're architected as a whole and how that piece fits into that architecture. So what I'm telling vendors now is you got to have a more comprehensive service than what you have. You have to come in and understand our strategy around security, how we're architected today, and then we can have the discussion about how you fit into that or how you might help us with that. But it's so scattered and piecemeal right now. I think it's hurting you and it's hurting us. And we really need that service, if you will, not just engineering, architecture that goes along with what you're trying to sell. So the firms we're having the most success with come in and provide that service in addition to deployment, so we don't have 30,000 things that don't get installed or whatever. And the training aspect. So it's that full-scale service, if you will, that I think we need, because a lot of times our stuff is not designed correctly, and we need some help with the overall architecture and design and strategy that we have to deploy. So I hope we can get to that. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that the vast majority of vendors that are trying to sell the government come in and say, I know I can help you, without even knowing what's going on inside that particular organization or agency. I think it's important that, in my team anyway, we do a ton of research before we go in and try to meet with somebody. We're not, just going in and saying, yeah, I'm confident that we can make you more secure. We need to understand what your architecture is, and we can go so far. I mean, the problem is there's a lot of noise out there. I'm sure you guys are looking at it going, especially when you go to a big trade show or something, you're looking around and everybody's, basically saying the same thing. And, it's like, okay, well, you're going to reduce your TCO and increase your security posture. And it's really difficult to cut through that. And I don't know if there's a good answer besides, training the vendor community to do better qualification is really what it comes down to understand if you really have, something that may be applicable to that particular organization. And I'm sure, some of the guys up here that are working with customers are doing the same thing. The more information you have, the better position you are to go in and actually get some interest and try to sell. But I do agree with you. In a lot of cases, some of the sales reps out there, they're being forced to go and just dial for dollars and try to, just sell anything to anybody. And that just doesn't work, When you're talking about enterprise level software, which we all, sell software and hardware and services, it's a much different sales cycle. And I think you probably get some of that within the collaboration meetings that you have. They're not real sales pitches. We're trying to figure out, hey, do we have something that you might want to, might be interested in, and trying to learn from you guys what the architecture is. In some cases, we just go shake hands and go, nope, you're already covered, In other cases, it's, hey, give me a call next week and let's set something up with the team. So I agree with your comment. I don't know how to solve it, but I appreciate the comment and certainly reinforce that with my team.
I think it's a really good point. I think vendors are, I'm on the vendor side, and I'd like to think that vendors are always doing the right thing, but I think sometimes because of whatever pressures we have, it's more focused on the product and not focused on the project, right? And we had a situation with actually someone in this room where we were very close to moving forward with the product sale, and we were asked to take a step back with them and then go through the process that you're exactly talking about. And while it was short-term painful, it was absolutely the right decision. There was compensation for us helping to go in and do that work, but the end result was a much more successful project, and we've learned so much from that we're now trying to take that approach to other places, right? So maybe we're the children in the conversation, and the other guys, the adults, right? I think that, but I think that we try to take a little bit of the we know that we don't know approach and try to learn from the customers and prospects that we have. The challenge that we have, though, is sometimes we put in those types of investments and the payoff doesn't come on the other side, and then you get to the same, we won't call it sequestration concerns, but we get to the same economic challenges. But it's a very valid point, and I think ultimately what you see the vendors who do that best are the ones who ultimately survive and succeed, and the ones who don't do that well are the ones that we don't talk about 5 years from now.
All right, we're going to close things up by asking one final question really quickly, gentlemen, and Steve, I can start with you. We talked about a lot of challenges, and if you could just help the audience walk away with what you would suggest being the one most important priority in terms of facing some of the challenges we identified today, in terms of managing and being successful in this new ecosystem that we're in, what would that be?
Buy as much Lumention as possible. No, yeah. Well, I was the first one. I figured one of these guys was going to say that, so I got to say it first. There's so many challenges out there, and again, I think it comes back to the original thing with morale. Most of the IT leaders in here and the government executives, I think that you guys are well motivated and trying to get your teams motivated. But some of the people down below that we talk to on a daily basis, the IT administrators and the security managers and so forth, are really down. There's uncertainty in the waters, and I think that's a big challenge, and I think that that's something that, regardless of my solution set and security and cloud and all that kind of stuff, if you don't have that, you're going to have a problem getting anything done. So,
the one thing that strikes out in my mind that can help with the people in this room is tone at the top. So it's kind of internal dating. We go find the security person, set up a meeting, and convey our information. Then we go find ops, and that dating is hard and it's segmented. But if we could have an executive, instead of pointing us to different people, call a meeting so that security and ops is in the room at the same time, it'd be a much better date and it would be more effective. So that's the biggest thing I can think of to walk away with. And then a comment on the salespeople pushing product instead of understanding priority. Some salespeople literally have 90 days to make their number or show progress. And just an email recognizing that person for coming in and helping understand the priorities can be as valuable as a purchase order sometimes. If you're on the line because you need to show you've done something with an agency, if you can't sell an order, you can sell an email saying, look, we understand where they're at and we're trying to help them. And it doesn't matter if us as the vendor tell our superiors, it needs to come from the customer. So that can be as important as a purchase order in some cases.
Be proactive. I know that's challenging in a tight budgetary environment, but being proactive doesn't necessarily mean you need to spend oodles of money. You folks and your teams know where your highest value assets are. They know where the risks are. And when people are following the same dogged path and they're saying, why am I doing this when I know we need to fix that over there? That's scaring me. Why am I doing this? That impacts morale, it impacts cost, it impacts overall security, right? So we always talk about being proactive because it's a lot cheaper to do it up front than it is to fix it after the case.
I guess I get to close it out.
You do.
Think differently. Your perimeter's broken. Adding a fourth vendor's firewall to complement the 3 that you already have is not going to cut it. Having one AV vendor on your email, another one on your laptop, and another one on your servers is not going to cut it. Think differently. Your infrastructure is not going to grow to be able to keep pace with the level of data we're getting. Exabytes upon exabytes of data per hour, per day. You're not going to do it. It's not going to work. These devices, more powerful than they were a year ago by 2 to 3x. You're not going to be able to think the same way you did last year, 10 years ago. You got to think differently. You've got to adopt the new technologies. You've got to listen to your vendors, and I agree with you 100%. The vendors also have to listen to the government. It's a two-way street, but you've got to think differently.
Awesome. All right, that was a great discussion, gentlemen. Thank you very much.